It was supposed to be a quiet birthday dinner, just like any other. But when my grandfather leaned forward, a knowing smile on his face, and asked, "How do you spend your $3.4 million trust fund?" my heart stopped. I blinked, stunned, and whispered, "What trust fund?" My parents exchanged looks so pale they might as well have been ghosts. And then my grandfather turned to them with one simple question that shattered everything. "Where did it go?" I was too stunned to speak, but in that moment, I realized this wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. But what happened next shocked everyone. I grew up in the world where success was never measured by the size of your paycheck, but by how much you could keep your life neat, contained, and under control. My name is Sophia Bennett, and from the outside, my life in Seattle looked ordinary enough. I spent my days as a marketing strategist working for a mid-sized tech firm. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment near the waterfront, surrounded by the hum of the city and the occasional sound of seagulls crying out against the gray skyline. The apartment wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it gave me a sense of independence that I cherished more than anything. My parents, on the other hand, lived in a sprawling home in Bellevue, an affluent suburb outside Seattle. They had the life everyone envied. 2 luxury cars in the driveway, a 5-bedroom house with a pool, and vacations that looked straight out of a travel brochure. Growing up, I admired the life they built, but I never thought too much about it. After all, I was taught that success was about finding happiness in your own way, not by comparing yourself to others. But beneath the surface, something wasn't quite right. My father, David Bennett, a successful real estate mogul, was always too busy to really connect with me. When he wasn't traveling for business, he was buried in his office, surrounded by paperwork and phone calls. My mother, Margaret, was the picture of grace, always perfectly put together, attending charity galas and managing the social calendar of our affluent circle. She loved me, I knew that, but there was always a strange distance between us, as though we were just 2 people going through the motions of being family, never truly close. I believed in the narrative they told me. "We're doing this for you, Sophia. We're giving you everything we never had." I never asked too many questions, never looked too closely at the discrepancies I noticed in their lives, the private conversations I overheard, the stress in their voices when money was mentioned, the way they avoided certain topics, especially when I was around. The truth is, I had been living in a world where silence was the currency of love. I had learned that the less you questioned, the more you were given. I accepted it all because I thought I understood the rules. Work hard, stay quiet, and things would fall into place. But then that dinner happened. I sat there, watching my parents in disbelief, as they nervously avoided my grandfather's gaze. Elliot Bennett, my paternal grandfather, was a man of incredible wealth and even greater mystery. He had built his fortune decades ago, quietly amassing power in industries I had never fully understood. While my parents played the role of well-to-do suburbanites, he had kept his distance, a shadow in the background of our lives. I knew he cared for me, but he was always the distant patriarch, a figure I barely knew but was never too far from my thoughts. And then, on my birthday, he dropped the bombshell. For as long as I could remember, the narrative of my family's success was painted in broad, secure strokes. My parents had built their lives from the ground up, sacrificing to give me everything they never had. I had always admired them for that, for their drive, their ambition. David had worked tirelessly in the world of real estate, often at the expense of family time, but he always made sure I understood that his sacrifices were for me. He wanted me to have the life he never had as a child. Margaret, on the other hand, was the epitome of elegance and grace. She had been a successful lawyer in her younger years, but stepped away from her career to raise me, though her passion for the social scene remained strong. I never questioned their choices, not until that dinner. I had always trusted that they knew best, that they were giving me the tools to succeed, to build a life as solid as their own. And for the longest time, I believed it was working. I went to college, got good grades, landed a decent job in marketing. Nothing spectacular, but enough to show that I was following in their footsteps, even if I wasn't living the high life they did. Yet, beneath the surface, something had always nagged at me. I never fully understood how they managed to afford everything they had. The house, the cars, the vacations. There were hints, subtle signs of financial strain, but I chalked it up to the inevitable pressures of maintaining such a luxurious lifestyle. They worked hard for it, I figured, so surely they deserved to enjoy it. But it wasn't just the money that had started to eat at me, it was the distance, the lack of connection, the constant avoidance of real conversations. My father was a workaholic, and my mother was perpetually busy with the social obligations that came with their status. I never felt like I truly knew them. Instead of opening up to me, they relied on the surface level gestures, the occasional gift, the praise for my achievements, but never really engaging with me on a deeper level. We had a surface level relationship, one built on appearance, one that made me feel more like an extension of their accomplishments than a part of their emotional world. There was one memory that stayed with me more than any other. When I graduated college, my parents gave me a grand gift, a check for $10,000 and a set of leather-bound books on personal finance. The check was nice, but the books felt impersonal, almost like a way for them to check a box without having to engage in a real conversation. I appreciated the gift, but something about it felt wrong. There was no heartfelt advice, no conversation about what I should do with my future. It felt like they were offering me knowledge, but not the real connection I craved. Still, I pushed these feelings aside. After all, I had the life they wanted me to have. I was comfortable, secure, and on track to do more than they had ever expected. So I accepted it. Silently. Quietly. I stayed in my lane, did my work, kept my thoughts to myself. My parents had raised me to believe that self-sufficiency and quiet ambition were the keys to happiness. But now, sitting in that restaurant with the weight of my grandfather's question in the air, everything felt like it had been a lie. The trust fund. The money that had been hidden from me for years. It was the thing they never talked about. The one thing I never asked about. It was the truth they had kept from me, and now it was the thing that would tear everything apart. The love I thought I had in my family, the trust I thought was unshakable, suddenly felt fragile, like glass that was about to break. In that moment, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my parents, about my family, was built on a foundation of silence and deceit. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about the truth they had hidden from me all these years. In the days that followed that dinner, everything began to feel different. My mind kept replaying that moment, the question, the silence that followed, and the cold, unreadable expressions on my parents' faces. I couldn't shake the image of my father, the man who always spoke in well-practiced tones, now suddenly avoiding my gaze. His usual calm was replaced by something deeper, something darker. I couldn't get the question out of my head. Where did the money go? The trust fund, the one my grandfather had set up for me, was supposed to be a safety net, a cushion to support me as I navigated life. But now all I could think about was how much I didn't know, and how much had been taken from me without my consent. I started to notice things I had ignored before. Small details, subtle shifts in behavior. My parents, once the picture of polished perfection, now seemed more tense than usual. The conversations that had once been light and breezy were now filled with awkward silences and evasions. Every time I brought up the topic of the trust fund, they deflected, changing the subject or offering vague excuses. "Don't worry about it, Sophia. We've been handling things. You'll be fine," my mother would say, her voice always carrying that same practiced tone of reassurance, but I could hear the strain beneath it. It was as if she was trying to convince herself as much as she was convincing me. Something was wrong, but I couldn't place it. Every time I thought I had figured it out, another layer of the mystery unfolded before me, and the truth seemed further away than ever. One afternoon, after weeks of quiet frustration, I decided to look into it myself. I began searching through old family documents, emails, and files I had never thought to open before. I was looking for anything that could explain the sudden drop in my trust fund, and that's when I found it. A series of bank statements. They were buried deep in a folder marked Family Investments, but it was clear they didn't belong there. The statements detailed large, irregular withdrawals, hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off in a series of transactions that made no sense. I didn't recognize the names of the companies receiving the money. There were dates that lined up with trips my parents had taken to Hawaii, Europe, and even a mysterious transfer to an overseas account in the Cayman Islands.
The more I dug, the worse it got. This wasn't just about money. This was about something far more sinister. My parents had used my trust fund to cover personal expenses, vacations, extravagant gifts, and most shockingly, an untraceable property in Malibu, one they had never mentioned to me. It was a purchase made under their names using my money, and I had never known. I felt my heart race as I pieced the puzzle together. The trust fund was gone, not just drained, but redirected. I was left with scraps while my parents lived in luxury. The betrayal I felt was suffocating, but there was more to this than just mismanagement. There was something more calculating at play, something far darker. The worst part was that my parents had known this the entire time. They hadn't just let it slip, they had kept it hidden from me. Every interaction, every smile, every "don't worry, we've got it covered" was a lie, and I had fallen for it for years. I had to confront them. I had to know why they had done this to me. Why hadn't they told me the truth? What were they hiding? I decided to call a family meeting. My heart pounded as I dialed the number, knowing that this was going to change everything. When I arrived at their house in Bellevue, I could feel the tension in the air before I even stepped inside. It wasn't the usual calm I'd grown up with. No, this time, there was something else. Something off. As soon as I sat down at the dinner table, my mother's eyes flickered nervously, and my father refused to meet my gaze. The silence was deafening. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steady but trembling inside. "What's going on? I know about the trust fund. Why didn't you tell me?" The room seemed to freeze, but my father finally looked at me, his eyes cold and empty. "We didn't want you to worry," he said quietly. "You had enough on your plate already. We were protecting you." But I wasn't buying it. I could hear the cracks in his voice, the hesitation. It was as if he was trying to justify what he knew was indefensible. And then my mother spoke, her voice shaking. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. We didn't mean to hurt you, Sophia." Her eyes were filled with tears, but it felt empty, like the emotions were scripted. "But we were just trying to help ourselves." I felt the floor drop beneath me. My world tilted again, and everything I thought I knew about my family unraveled before my eyes. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about the foundation of my entire relationship with them. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a family problem. It was a betrayal. A betrayal that had been carefully constructed over years. I had to make a choice now. What was I going to do about it? The answer was clearer than I wanted to admit.
The discovery hit harder than I ever could have imagined. As my parents' explanations grew weaker, the weight of their betrayal settled in. The life they had carefully constructed for me, the one I had accepted and admired, had all been built on lies. Every milestone, every gesture had been tinged with their dishonesty. They had withheld the truth from me, hidden the money, manipulated my trust, and never once considered how their actions would impact me. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. The fact that they had made decisions for me without ever letting me in on the process. They had treated me like a child who couldn't handle the truth, while behind closed doors, they had been living a life I would never have imagined for them. The house in Malibu, that was the breaking point. The idea that they had bought a second home using my money and hadn't even told me felt like a slap in the face. They hadn't just dipped into my trust fund, they had done so without any regard for my future, my well-being, or my understanding of how I was supposed to get ahead in life. I stared at the receipts, the bank statements that had been carefully hidden in the family folder, tracing each transaction with my finger. It wasn't just the luxury car purchases or the extravagant vacations. It was the little things, the unnecessary renovations, the golden watches, the private yacht rentals, all paid for with the money that was supposed to secure my future. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional. They had treated me like a fool, an afterthought, and it was something I couldn't just brush aside. I had been their daughter, trusting them, loving them, and believing in the image they had created. But now, I felt like I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion,
an illusion that had been built with my money. I didn't feel angry at first. It was as if the shock had left me paralyzed, unable to move or even think clearly. But as the hours dragged on, the anger began to rise. It was a slow burn, seeping into every corner of my mind. I kept replaying the conversations we had, the subtle ways they deflected my questions, the way they made everything seem so effortless, when in reality, they were draining my future away bit by bit. I remember walking down the streets of Seattle, the city buzzing around me, but I felt like I was moving in slow motion. The weight of what I had learned was too much. I passed a coffee shop where I had spent countless hours working, but now everything felt different. The city, once a symbol of independence, now felt like a cage. The more I walked, the more the rage built. How could they do this to me? I had worked so hard for everything I had. I'd taken on student debt, worked long hours, and still barely made ends meet. And yet my parents had decided that my future wasn't worth protecting, that their luxury was more important than my security. I couldn't believe I was even asking these questions. These weren't the kind of things you thought about when you were young and naive. But now, everything had changed. The trust, the foundation of our relationship, had been broken in an instant. That night, I stood in my apartment staring at the financial documents on the table in front of me. I knew I had to confront them, but part of me didn't want to lose the family I had always known. It was too much to bear, too painful to accept. But I couldn't ignore what they had done. I couldn't turn a blind eye to their actions anymore. I knew the truth, and the truth had changed everything. The next day, I called them, asked them to meet at their house in Bellevue. I told them I knew about the trust fund, about the Malibu house, about everything. I could hear the panic in their voices when they agreed to meet, but I wasn't interested in their excuses anymore. I was done. When I arrived, my father was pacing in the living room and my mother was sitting quietly, avoiding my gaze. The tension was palpable, thicker than I had ever felt before. They knew what was coming. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice cold, steady. "I know about the money, the Malibu house, the lies. You took from me. You took my future." My father turned to me, his face pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. It wasn't the usual calm I had always known. This was something different. This was guilt. "You don't understand, Sophia," he finally said, his voice trembling. "We were just trying to give you a better life." "A better life?" The word stung, but I didn't let it show. By stealing from me? By taking away the one thing that was supposed to protect me? No, Dad. You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to protect yourselves. And you're gonna pay for it. It wasn't just the money I wanted back. It was the trust, the sense of security that had been stolen from me. They had built their lives on a lie, and now they would have to face the consequences. I looked at my mother, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Do you know how much you've taken from me? How much damage you've done? How long were you going to keep lying to me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no sympathy in me. Not anymore. I had to make them face the truth even if it meant tearing our family apart. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. The days after that confrontation felt like I was walking through a fog. The silence was unbearable. I hadn't expected them to apologize, but I didn't expect the cold distance either. My father barely spoke, his guilt hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into herself, barely holding it together. The tears she had shed in the living room were gone, replaced with an eerie calm that unnerved me. I stayed in my apartment for the next few days, not knowing what to do next. I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined after confronting them. Instead, I felt numb. The silence between us was deafening. The tension was too much to bear. They hadn't called, hadn't even texted. It was as if we were strangers now. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone, even with them just a few miles away. The betrayal settled deep inside me, like a stone sinking into a dark pool. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was emptiness, as though the family I had known was a fragile facade, easily shattered. I had spent years trying to please them, to earn their approval, only to find out that everything I thought was real was nothing more than an illusion. I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind. The dinner, the confrontation, their empty excuses. The lies had been so seamless, so perfectly crafted, that I hadn't even seen them coming. And now that I knew, it felt like the world I had lived in had collapsed. I kept asking myself, how could they do this to me? I thought about the money, about the trust fund that should have been mine, about the betrayal of their actions. But it wasn't just the money. It was the realization that my entire life had been built on false promises. They had kept me in the dark, thinking everything was fine, when behind my back they were draining my future. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the manipulation ran. My parents hadn't just kept the trust fund from me, they had manipulated me into believing I didn't deserve it, that I didn't need it. And I had believed them. I had accepted that my hard work and sacrifices were enough, that the path they laid out for me was the only one worth following. But now I knew differently. One night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the city lights casting faint shadows through my window. The weight of everything was too much to bear. I grabbed my phone and called my grandfather, Elliot Bennett. I needed answers. I needed to know what had happened, what my parents were really hiding. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm as always. "Sophia, what is it?" "Grandpa, I need your help. I found the documents, the bank statements, the property records. What's really going on with my trust fund?" There was a long pause. I could feel his hesitation through the phone, the weight of the truth he hadn't told me. "Listen closely, Sophia," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "Your parents have made some choices. They've used the money, yes, but there's more to this than just poor financial decisions. They've been hiding things from you. Not just money, secrets. And those secrets go far deeper than you think." I felt a chill run down my spine. What did he mean? What secrets? "Grandpa, what aren't you telling me?" He sighed, his voice tinged with regret. "I'll explain everything soon, but for now, be careful. They're not the people you think they are, and if you push too hard, they'll do everything they can to make sure you don't uncover the truth." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. Secrets? What could he mean by that? The deeper I dug, the more complicated it became. I was no longer just dealing with a stolen inheritance. This was a family with a history of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal that reached far beyond what I could see. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the documents on the table, bank statements, property deeds, and the list of extravagant purchases. But none of that mattered anymore. The truth was deeper than the money. It was about who they really were and what they had done to me. The silence between us was deafening, but it wasn't just the silence of unspoken words. It was the silence of a betrayal so complete that it shattered the very foundation of everything I thought I knew. And as much as I hated them for what they had done, I hated myself even more for not seeing it sooner.
The silence from my parents dragged on for days, like a slow, suffocating weight pressing down on me. I spent most of my time at home, lost in thought, sorting through the chaos of my emotions. But beneath the numbness, something else was stirring. A cold determination that had begun to take root. One I wasn't sure I wanted to acknowledge. I had always prided myself on being calm, collected, the one who didn't make waves. But now I could feel a shift inside me. The hurt, the betrayal, the injustice, it was all simmering beneath the surface, and the longer I let it sit, the more I realized I wasn't going to let it go. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch my family's actions go unpunished. I didn't want revenge for the money. I didn't need the trust fund to feel validated. No, this was about justice. This was about making them see that their actions had consequences, that their betrayal had cost me far more than just money. It had cost me my sense of trust, my relationship with them. And it would cost them too. I began to formulate a plan. The first thing I needed was information. My grandfather had told me to be careful, but I knew that if I was going to confront my parents, I needed the full picture. So I started to dig deeper. I reached out to my grandfather's lawyer, James Evans, the same one who had helped him set up the trust fund all those years ago. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when I called, he answered right away. His voice was gravelly, but his tone was gentle, understanding. "Sophia," he said after I explained my situation, "I've been following the situation with your parents closely."
They've been moving assets around for months. But what's more concerning is their attempts to hide things from you. I've been preparing a report. It's time you know exactly what you're up against. A week later, I met with James in a quiet cafe on the edge of Seattle's Capitol Hill. He slid a folder across the table, its contents thick with documents. I didn't even need to ask. I could see from the way he looked at me that this wasn't just about money. This was something much bigger. He explained that my parents' financial mismanagement wasn't a simple mistake. They'd been siphoning off funds for years, using the trust fund as a cover for their own poor investments. The Malibu house wasn't just a luxury property. It was part of a complex network of offshore accounts, property deals, and investments they had kept hidden from us. And it wasn't just about my inheritance. It was about what they had been doing with other people's money, too. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. I was looking at a web of deceit so tangled that I couldn't even see where it started and where it ended. But it didn't matter. I was already too deep. They had hurt me, yes, but what they had done to others, what they had covered up, that was where the real consequences lay. The plan started taking shape, piece by piece. First, I needed to get everything documented. I needed hard evidence to show what they had done. I couldn't just confront them blindly, not with what was at stake. I needed leverage, something that would hit them where it hurt the most: their reputation, their wealth, their control. James helped me contact a forensic accountant to trace every financial transaction, every asset, every shady deal. It wasn't just about exposing them to the world, it was about taking control of my life again, about flipping the tables and forcing them to face the truth. I also began to document everything: phone calls, meetings, personal interactions. I couldn't trust them anymore, so I made sure I had a record of everything they said, every lie, every excuse, every denial. I was building my case, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth in my hands. Then, I turned my attention to the Malibu property, the beach house, the one they had hidden from me. It wasn't just a piece of luxury real estate. It was a symbol of everything they had taken from me, everything they had stolen in their pursuit of status. I couldn't let it stay in their hands, not after everything they had done. With the help of my grandfather's legal team, I started the process of recovering the property. It wasn't easy, but I had the law on my side now. The documents I had gathered, the evidence of financial fraud, they were enough to start the legal battle. But there was one more thing I needed: to make my parents understand the gravity of what they had done. And that was where the revenge would begin. I wasn't going to destroy them, at least not entirely, but I was going to expose them for who they truly were, and that would be enough. They would pay for their actions not with money, but with their reputation. The life they had built on lies would crumble, and I would be the one to watch it happen. I could feel the tension in my chest easing as I realized that finally I was taking control. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't just some pawn in their game. I was going to win this. But as the plan took shape, I knew the next step would be the hardest. I had to face my parents, finally confront them with everything they had done. And I couldn't do it halfway. This time, I wasn't backing down. Before we dive into the next chapter, let me ask you, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted most? What would you do if everything you believed in, your family, your future, was ripped away in a single moment? I'm curious. Drop a comment below and let me know what you would do if you were in my shoes. I want to hear your thoughts. How far would you go to make sure the truth comes to light? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The day of the confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. My parents hadn't contacted me since our last meeting, and I hadn't reached out either. The silence between us had grown heavier, more suffocating. But deep down, I knew the moment was coming. The moment when I would finally make them see the consequences of their actions. I had planned every step carefully. I knew I couldn't just walk into their house and demand answers. No, this needed to be precise. I needed them to understand the full weight of what they had done, to feel the pressure of everything they had tried to bury coming to the surface. It was time to take control. I arrived at their house in Bellevue with a clear head, a folder of evidence in my hand. I was ready. As soon as I stepped inside, I could feel the difference in the air. The usual charm of the home was gone, replaced with an unsettling quiet. My parents were waiting for me in the living room, but this time they weren't dressed in their usual perfect attire. My father was in a suit, his tie askew, and my mother was sitting with her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes avoiding mine. "Sit down, Sophia," my father said, his voice tight. The tone was so different from the usual condescending calmness. This wasn't a conversation. It was the calm before the storm. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. It was filled with bank statements, property deeds, and financial reports. Everything I had uncovered. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched them, waiting for them to acknowledge the weight of what was in front of them. It didn't take long for my father to break. His eyes darted to the folder, then to my face, and back to the folder again. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice low. "Does it matter?" I replied, my voice steady. "You know exactly what they are. You know exactly what you've done." My mother let out a sharp breath, trying to steady herself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but I wasn't going to be swayed by her tears anymore. The woman who had once seemed so graceful, so poised, was nothing more than a coward hiding behind her wealth. I slid the folder toward them. "This is what you've been hiding. The Malibu property, the offshore accounts, the money you stole. How long were you planning to keep this from me? How long were you going to live a lie?" My father's face turned pale, his usual controlled demeanor cracking. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the weight of the truth. "We were just trying to protect you," he said weakly. "We didn't want you to have to worry about this. It was for your future." I laughed bitterly. "For my future? You took away my future and spent it on yourselves. You didn't protect me, you used me. I was just the safety net you could steal from when you needed more. And now I want it all back." My mother's face crumpled at my words, and I could see the shame in her eyes, but I didn't care anymore. She had betrayed me, just like my father had. I pulled out the next piece of evidence, the transfer document for the Malibu house, and slid it across the table. "This is where it went. The property you've been hiding from me, funded entirely from my trust fund. I want it back, and I'll make sure you lose everything you've taken." My father stood up abruptly, his hands shaking. "You don't understand, Sophia. This is all we've worked for. We didn't want you to go through what we went through. "No," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You wanted to live a comfortable life while I worked myself to the bone. You didn't want to share the wealth, you wanted to control it. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." There was a long pause. No one spoke. It was like the room had frozen, every breath held in anticipation. Finally, my father dropped his shoulders, defeated. He knew he couldn't deny it anymore. "I'm done protecting you," I said quietly, standing up and collecting the documents. "The law will take care of the rest, but don't think for a second that this is over. I'm not the girl who just takes it anymore." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps as I walked to the door. As I left, I glanced back one last time, watching them crumble under the weight of their own guilt. They knew this wasn't just a financial loss. It was the beginning of everything they had built falling apart. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one more step to take, one final move that would expose everything. The days following that confrontation were a blur. I had expected them to fight back, to push back against the avalanche of evidence I had thrown at them. But instead, there was only a haunting silence. I didn't hear from them, not once. Not a phone call, not a text, nothing. I spent the following week in a haze, staring at the documents, waiting for the next move. I knew what had to come next, the legal action, the inevitable fight to reclaim everything they had stolen from me. But as the days dragged on, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Relief.
For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The weight of uncertainty, of never knowing the truth, had been lifted. My phone didn't ring with their apologies or their attempts at excuses, and strangely, I found comfort in the absence of their voices. The world outside seemed quieter, calmer, as if I were finally free of their manipulations. I continued my work, threw myself into my projects, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. I wasn't chasing after their approval anymore. I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I had my own now. A week later, I got the call I had been expecting. It was from James Evans, my grandfather's lawyer. He had been working behind the scenes to ensure that everything I had uncovered would be legally addressed. The forensic audit was complete. My parents had been investigated, and the assets they had hidden, the properties they had siphoned funds to, were all exposed. "What's next?" I asked when I picked up the phone. My heart was racing in anticipation of what would come. "We're filing the lawsuits," James said, his voice firm. "And with the evidence we have, we're confident the courts will rule in your favor. The Malibu house, the other properties, they'll be returned to you. And your parents, well, they'll have to answer for what they've done." I let out a slow breath. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about getting my inheritance back. It was about standing up for myself, reclaiming control of a life that had been hijacked. It was about making sure that this never happened again. And then James added, "Your parents also agreed to restitution. They're paying back what they stole starting next month. $500,000. It's not everything, but it's a start." I felt the sting of the number, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever truly be enough to compensate for what they had done. But the law had a way of making things right, even if it couldn't heal the emotional wounds they had caused. As the legal process moved forward, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I sold the apartment in Seattle, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted a fresh start, one where I wasn't carrying the weight of their betrayal with me. I found a new place, a cozy, sunlit apartment in Capitol Hill, where I could work in peace and begin to rebuild not just my finances, but my trust in myself. My grandfather's health was failing, but his presence was more constant than ever. He called me regularly, checking in, offering advice. He was proud of the way I had handled everything, though I had done it mostly alone. Still, his words of encouragement kept me grounded. He didn't see me as a pawn in his game. He saw me as his equal, and that meant more to me than any sum of money. But as the weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. My parents reached out, not with apologies, not with contrition, but with an ultimatum. They wanted to meet. They wanted to talk. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into their house that day. I had imagined this moment many times in my mind, rehearsed the things I would say, the things I would do. But when I saw them sitting there, their faces pale, the guilt etched into their features, I realized that I didn't need to say anything. Their silence spoke louder than any words could. "Do you regret it?" I asked them, my voice steady, no emotion leaking through. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and something else, defenselessness. "We thought we were doing what was best for you, but we were wrong." My mother, who had always been the calm one, broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I'm so sorry." But the apologies came too late. The years of lies, of manipulation, could never be undone by a simple, "I'm sorry." The trust we had once shared was gone, replaced by something else, something that could never be repaired. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. "I've heard enough." And I walked out, leaving behind the family that had once meant everything to me. Looking back, I can't help but reflect on the person I was before all of this happened. The version of myself who believed in family above all else, who trusted that blood meant loyalty and that love was supposed to be unconditional. That person was naive, caught in a world of lies.
But now, I see how far I've come. I've learned that trust is earned, not given freely. I've learned that family can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the most. They can be the ones who manipulate you, take from you, and leave you questioning your worth. But I've also learned something else, that betrayal doesn't define me. It doesn't take away my ability to rebuild, to reclaim the pieces of my life that were stolen from me. Through all of this, I discovered my own strength. I found the courage to take control of my future and not let the actions of others dictate my path. The betrayal hurt. It still does, in ways I can't fully explain. But it also gave me the power to take back what was rightfully mine. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The hardest part wasn't confronting my parents. It was confronting myself. It was accepting that the family I thought I knew, the life I had always imagined, was built on falsehoods. It was accepting that I had allowed them to dictate my reality for so long, and finally realizing that I had the power to change it.
It's hard to forget what you've lost. It's even harder to rebuild what's been taken. But I've learned something invaluable through this journey. You don't have to stay trapped in the past. You have the power to reclaim your future, no matter how much it hurts to face the truth. So if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, or if you've ever had to rebuild your life after a storm, you're not alone. We all have our battles to fight, but it's how we rise after the fall that defines us. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever had to take control of your own life after betrayal, subscribe now, because the next chapter is already waiting for you. Comment below and share your thoughts. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you seek justice, or would you walk away? Let's talk about it. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I'm excited to continue sharing the real stories that matter. Stay tuned, because the next story might just hit closer to home than you think.